Hey, what's going on, ladies and gentlemen? This is Retro Davo coming to you with another unboxing. And today we're going to be talking about the N64. Now, the N64 was as much as it's beloved, it was actually a really big flop back in the day. It's one of Nintendo's worst selling consoles of all time. Aside from the Wii U, I believe this might be the other worst selling console. I'm not positive. Maybe the GameCube sold less than the N64, but basically, long story short, until the Wii happened, which ironically was just a overpowered GameCube, so explain that one to me with motion controls. Until the Wii happened, Nintendo was on a constant downward spiral with every console that they released. The N64 was a really clever console back in the day. It came with 4 controller ports, which was really unique because other prior consoles, including the Super Nintendo and the NES, only had 2, and so did their competitor, the PlayStation, unless you bought the multi-tap. But the original PlayStation came out actually before the N64, and it used CD-ROMs, and the reason the N64, even though it was more powerful, keep that in mind, it pissed developers off because it forced developers to use cartridges. And so a lot of third parties chose not to develop for the N64. But sure, we got some classic games like GoldenEye, the 2 Legend of Zelda games. There's some great games on the N64. They're just hard to come by because it didn't sell as many back in the day, which is why I'm so, not for modding these things. But that's not what we're here to talk about. And yes, in this N64, I do have the expansion module that allows you to play certain games. A while back, I showed you how to fix your stuck reset button. Power switch is right here. But there's a longer problem that's been going on with the N64. And I'm sure you all know what that is. And that is the iconic yet atrocious N64 controller. Now, this controller was groundbreaking at the time because it was actually the very first controller to have a analog stick. Sure, it only had 1, but it was still the first. Who would have anticipated that we'd be going 2? Because this was the first time that we had gotten a controller with an analog stick. All prior controllers just used D-pads and buttons. And the N64 broke a lot of grounds into modern gaming. All owe their things to this. Like, you think that PlayStation came up with the joysticks? No. In fact, the PlayStation controller originally launched with only the buttons. It was essentially a Super Nintendo controller with the 2 handle bars. There was the D-pad and the 4 buttons and, shoulder triggers and, the left and right triggers. But this was the first to have an analog joystick. And then also, if you look on the back here, it was also the first to have, oh, sorry, wrong way. There's no batteries in here, but this is the Rumble Pack. It was the first controller to introduce Rumble to the gaming world. And a lot of us think of Rumble in, you know, the PlayStation controller with the Dual Shock and Xbox. Actually, Nintendo did it first with this, and as a response to this controller, Sony completely redesigned the PlayStation controller and came out with the original DualShock, which had 2 thumbsticks, as well as, I believe it was it the DualShock or the DualShock 2? I can't remember, but they eventually put rumble motors inside the controllers, which are there to this day. So Nintendo was actually there first. And they're kind of reinventing the first with Rumble because, you know, with the Switch, they have so-called 3D Rumble in the Joy-Cons. But alas, the glory of this controller was not to be, because a thing happened. Mario Party happened. Several games were released on N64, and a lot of them revolved around abusing this joystick. Now, this joystick is technically really good, but it's just, there's no metal part to this joystick, and it eventually really wears out. I've had to replace the joystick. You can actually get replacement joysticks online still to repair your original controllers. However, up until recently, the better option was actually to find a third-party controller. Okay, so this is the first third-party N64 controller that I have, and if you'll notice, the thumbstick is actually built with a different quality. It's actually made of metal as well as plastic, so this one won't break as easily. But it's in a very awkward shape. This is called the Super Pad 64 Colors. And you can hold it kind of like an original controller, you know, and using the D-pad. The D-pad kind of sucks, but not many N64s use the D-pad. The start button, the C buttons are all in the same place, and so are A and B. I find this controller actually quite comforting because I can actually still manage to use the joystick. The L and R buttons are kind of weird. You kind of just rest your fingers to use those, and ironically, you can even use your fingers if they're long enough to manage the Z button on the bottom. So it is an awkward controller. I find it actually more comfortable than the original N64 controller, first party by Nintendo, but it's certainly not the best option, and it's still kind of awkward if you're used to modern controllers. I don't know how many of these are out there in the world. I managed to somehow have 2 of them. One is a different model than this. They have extra buttons up here, but that is one option. If you come across one of these, it's not the worst. So, yeah, keep your eye out. But there are better options out there. Alright, so this next one I know there can't be a crap ton of out there. This one is actually by Mad Catz. It's really huge. It's got this, I can't even fit it all in the camera because it's so huge, but it's got a really nice, it's completely built differently. It's by, the stick is built completely different. It's actually more along the lines of what we know today with the bigger ball that has the stick coming out of it, and you know, it's along those lines. The D-pad is sorry. The D-pad, it's still a little clunky, but it's more or less kind of like a 360 D-pad, I would say, or a Sega Genesis D-pad is actually a more accurate description of it. And this is not modern Mad Catz. This is Mad Catz from back in the days when actually Mad Catz made some really good third-party peripherals, not the Mad Catz that, you know, made Rock Band whatever and caused them to completely shut down and revamp the company. It's got, you know, slow, reset, turbo. I don't use that. A really interesting oval start button. You got your A and B buttons. You got the C buttons. You got really nice L and R triggers. And of course, on the bottom, just ignore that. It's because this is third hand. This is like a second hand controller, and whoever had this before, their dog or whatever got to it, but it's got a pretty nice, like, more modern type trigger on for the Z trigger. So yeah, this one I would actually recommend if you can find one. I don't know how many of these are out in the world. I don't, but if you ever see one of these, it's a decent controller. They last. Unless you completely snap that off. But this would have been the one I would have recommended if you could find it, but there's a better option that is being made today. So yeah, the N64 controller was a revolutionary controller, but it's really prone to breaking, which is why I'm so excited to be doing this special unboxing. So let's get into it. Alright, so here's the package that just arrived from CastlemaniaGames.com. Even though this is not their product, Castlemania Games simply sells products from other people. So let's open it up. So you already know that it's going to be a replacement for the N64 controller, because that's what this whole video is about. So let's see. Oh, what did I lose down here? Oh, it's a Castlemania Games sticker. Nice. Keep that as a souvenir. So in the box, we have another box. We have the RetroFighters Brawler64 gamepad for use with the N64. Now, I'm not sure why, but recently they've come out with versions of this that connect by USB to other devices, which, I don't know, I guess if you're playing emulators, I guess, which I don't do really, but yeah, this I've seen is a great replacement because it's actually a lot more comfortable, because it's a lot more, as you can tell, shaped like a modern controller, yet it's got all the required buttons. And I will say I like the box. It's very N64 era style box. But let's actually get to the controller. So see a little tab here. I don't think there's a sticker. Nope. I believe we just pop it open. And it should be right inside. Yes. Oh shit, I ripped the box a little bit. It's alright. Nice. So here it is. This is the RetroFighters Brawler64. And my first impression, having it in my hands, is yes, this is a lot more comfortable. The stick kind of feels to me like a smooth, in between a, don't know what it feels like. It feels kind of like a smoothed out GameCube stick. You know how the GameCube had those ridges on the top? This feels, yeah, it feels a lot like a GameCube quality stick. It's got an actual D-pad, which I like. Now the buttons, I don't know, they're kind of flat, but I think that's okay. It's a third-party controller. What are they going to do? Steal buttons from actual controllers from back in the day and make them rarer? I think not. This is interesting. Depending on what you want to do, there are two Z buttons. They probably do the same thing. Just because the original N64 controller only had one Z button, they just adapted it to doing the same thing, I'm pretty sure. L and R are both here. You got your... Okay, so there's a turbo button and a clear button. I'm not sure what that's all about. But, I like that they did actually make the, slot for the Rumble Pack, or in many cases, memory cards. I remember back in the day, this was a really weird thing because the memory cards went into the controller, unlike the PlayStation or the PlayStation 2, where the memory cards went in the console. But yeah, that's the RetroFighters controller. As you can tell, it's a lot more comfortable and feels actually a lot more like a today's traditional controllers. So let's try it out on the N64. Alright, so I've got the N64 hooked up via S-Video to the RetroTink, which is then going through HDMI to the television. I'm going to be using one of my favorite N64 games, Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, which was a Blockbuster exclusive. So it's a semi-rare cartridge, and it's a pretty truthful, it's a pretty good port of the PC game, which I also had back in the day. The RetroFighters controller. Don't know what that line flickering is. It could be just the fact that the system is old. Yeah, let's push the start button. I apologize for the flickering. It's because I haven't quite figured out S-Video with the RetroTink yet, but the fact that I have a picture at all, I'll consider a victory. I just have to, you might say, tinker with the RetroTink. Find out the best. Could be the cartridge is also dirty. I haven't used my N64 in years. This is literally the first time that's... I don't think I've played this N64 since I reviewed GoldenEye way back, but you know what, we're gonna erase a game. Yeah, we're going to erase. I will say, another reference to Cinemassacre. James, Mike, I love your videos, but I gotta call you out on this one. I don't know why, you didn't give this, game a fair, chance, because this, I think, is actually a hidden gem of the N64. Sometime I'll do a video, now that I have this up and running, of the comparison between this and the PC version that I got off Steam. It's actually very, very truthful. You'd be shocked. So anyways, let's get to the game. And I've played a lot of Indiana Jones games, and I really wish Disney would, you know, not that I'm trying to crack a gay joke, but come out of the flipping closet and give Indiana Jones to some developer, because there were some really good Indiana Jones games. And yes, this game has somewhat weird controls. This isn't a full review of the game, but just wanted to show you guys. And I am playing with the this is probably the version of the game I played the most, though. I've beaten the PC version as well as this game. But if you want to talk bad controls, try the PC version. The PC version, the controls are actually, I would argue, 10 times worse than this game. So yeah, guys, I'm using the controller, and I honestly have... Oh yeah, that's the camera. I honestly have to say, this is a really good experience. It feels like how whoops, I don't want that. How do I duck again? Oh, yeah, it's one of the triggers, isn't it? Yep. Yeah, guys, I would honestly say, if you really love the N64, which I know there's a cult following, I would honestly say get yourselves one of these RetroFighters Brawler64 controllers. So, this is Retro Davo signing out. Peace, and I'll catch you guys in another video. And yes, don't listen to James and Mike. If you ever see this cartridge somewhere for sale, pick it up.